Good to see you.
So good to see you, babe. How are you?
Good. Just, hanging out in my apartment like everyone else in the world. So doing
I
pretty
know.
good.
And you're London Bay, right? Like you're still here.
Still here. Yep. I've been here for a full year without leaving, which is the longest I've ever stayed in one place. But it's been nice.
Yeah, I feel you definitely. But I know you've got your cute little cat as well to keep you company. So
I do. If she makes an appearance, I'll pop her up to say hello, but don't know where she is now. But she is a delight. She keeps me company.
fantastic. Well, it's amazing to have you today here. We just wanna know all the amazing things that you've been up to because as you know, our community is really big on creating a lot of new work for themselves. And I know that you've been really active with your Indigo Arts Collective. So we wanted to find out more about how all the inspiration that you've had in the lockdown because there's been so many projects that you've been doing, things like the Sonnet series and your own one woman show, but also some of the new stuff that you've done, for example the confined choreography that seems to be going places too.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think, you know, so we've been on this journey as an artistic community globally for a year now of having to really rethink the way that we want to create work and engage with work. And I think that for me, I was struck by the opportunity to maybe create in new ways that these unique global obstacles were presenting, right? So rather than take existing work or existing projects that I had in the pipeline and try and adapt them to fit in a virtual space, I thought it might be more interesting to explore what the world of virtual connectivity and virtual community building could offer us as artists. And as a practitioner, how I could maybe flex different sides of my own methodology by rising to that challenge. So that's sort of what prompted it. And I was like, oh, I'm not sure if playing in the virtual space is going to be something that I enjoy. Like I might just sit back and be a consumer of other people's art in that space this year because I don't really know if that feels true to me. And then once I started interacting with it and exploring it and kind of making it my own, it became very exciting. So yeah, I think it started with the Sonnet Response series, right kind of in March, like right when we first went into lockdown about a year ago. Because I was just feeling I was feeling my own disappointment in lost jobs and contracts and work and things like that. I was supposed to be going to Edinburgh last year and I was really looking forward to that. So I was feeling my own bummed out energy around that, but then also seeing that across my community, so many artists and actors and performers who were sharing in that disappointment. But I was like, well, what can I do to involve as many people as possible and to make this really accessible for people all over? And then that went well. And then from there, I started creating smaller groups and cultivating more specific projects from there.
Yeah, I think that was really quite amazing because what you've done with your initiative, and if you could tell us a bit more about the Indigo Arts Collective, because you're a theater company, but you seem to do a lot of, I know you do a lot of female-centric work, but in this case, you're very inclusive and you are looking at like really, you're not just creating for yourself, like you're creating for the collective. So that's just very interesting. Do tell us a bit more about the genesis of the collective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I knew, I started the company because I was producing my own one-person show and I wanted to have a company that was producing the work that wasn't just me, and I wanted to have a place to put funds and to manage. So it started out very logistical. And then I realized that the way that I enjoy making work, as much as I enjoyed doing my own show and doing that as a solo project, was really working collaboratively with other people. And I think specifically because I'm so interested in telling women's stories, my perspective is just not enough, right? I'm one woman. So it became very clear to me early on that I was going to want to work in a way where I could not only work with lots of other people, but actually have their stories become the story that we're telling in a lot of ways. Or if it's a story that's maybe about something else that's specific, have collective perspective on the telling of that story. So it emerged out of an interest in that. And then I think it developed further during this last year out of the need to connect with others, right? And also seeing that there were so many people wanting to connect and people having the bandwidth to do that maybe more so than they would otherwise, because people had a lot of time on their hands. So they could join me in like a 2-week workshop series, right, to generate work. And that wasn't as much of a sacrifice of their time and energy as it might have been if they were doing lots of other things. So it was a combination of unique opportunities. But I think the biggest thing being that the stories I want to tell require a lot of perspective that I don't hold individually as one person. So getting as many perspectives as possible is, I think, the most truthful way to voice what I'd like to voice with my art.
Yeah, I think that's very humble, and I think that's very sensitive of you to approach it in that way and to provide this opportunity for conversation, which I know a lot of artists have started to do, and so it's a lovely thing that you've been able to, you know, bring all these artists together, and as you know, obviously boundaries are kind of gone in a sense, as far as you can work with someone halfway across the world and deliver a project.
Yeah, exactly. And that's been really exciting. And I think I've found, you know, people, artists in all different kind of corners of the globe, just through the magic of like social media algorithms and friends of friends, right? I've had people come and join us for projects who I never would have met otherwise. And now those are people that are part of my, you know, global artistic network. And I've started like keeping a database of like everyone's skills and talents and where they're based and whatever. So I have this great resource of people all over who can do all sorts of wonderful things, which otherwise, you know, we probably never would have interacted.
Yeah, that's the beauty, I guess, of the sort of cup, glass half full approach, as opposed to just only focusing on what we can't do. I mean, but if I were to give our audiences right now a little bit of a lowdown as to the number of projects you've done in the past year, you know, from the Sonnet Response series, that was what I think was 154 submissions, because it was the entire sonnet canon from Shakespeare. So I thought that was quite an undertaking. And then you also did your choreography, Confined, which is a dance film. You had Ivy Days, which was quite interesting, which is an installation project. And then also you've completed your master's, have you, in contemporary performance practice?
That's
Fantastic.
Right, yeah. I finished in October.
Wow.
We should have finished in June, but then because our work obviously required us to be in the space, we ended up bumping it out. So I was fortunate. I was able to present my dissertation mostly as I had imagined it, in a real space, which, you know, I would have been okay if we couldn't have done it, because obviously safety comes first. But the fact that the university was able to move things around for us and give us the space to do that safely was really a gift, because my dissertation project was it was a performative installation work, so it involved some really big pieces. Like I had sheets of fabric hanging from the ceiling, and I had projection elements, and it would have been difficult to replicate it outside of a well-equipped studio environment. So I was fortunate to have access to that.
Yeah, no, it was on a very poignant subject as well, about the because you called it the point of disappearance, and it touches very strongly to do with the unwed mothers in Ireland. And I know you have Irish heritage, so was that something that you consciously connected to, or was that part of something that you found and then you thought, okay, this resonated?
Yeah, so yeah, growing up at home, we were always very attuned to sort of keeping eyes and ears on what was going on in Ireland, and we have family that's over there still, so it was always a point of interest and something that we kind of learned about and heard about peripherally to our upbringing in the States. So in the mid 2000s, there was a bit of a scandal around some bodies of children that were found in unmarked graves at one of these institutions in Ireland. And it sparked a sort of big discussion about this huge institutional network in Ireland that had been pervasive for decades and decades and had these really horrific impacts on generations of women and children, that hadn't really, you know, people knew about it and there were some discussions about it if it affected you or someone you knew, but it wasn't something that was front of mind for people that had a lot of outcry around it until this sort of discovery. So from then to now, in Ireland and within the Irish diaspora, and people that are attuned to that in Irish America. This has been this sort of unfolding event, and actually recently there was an investigation that went on, and the report of that investigation was just recently released about a month ago, and that's been controversial. So it's very rooted, obviously, in the past, but also some of these institutions didn't close until the 1970s, and the people that were affected by these places are very much alive and still being affected, right? And then when we also think about the inherited trauma of people that generationally existed in these spaces, so it's both past and very present. And something that's evolving very currently now. So it's something that I've been kind of watching throughout the years, and very much went into this master's wanting to focus on, because there's a lot of narrative performance work about this sort of topic. I think everyone automatically is like, oh, like Philomena, because everyone's seen that movie about the woman who is in an institution, then she goes to track down her son, and it speaks truth to some of that story, and then it's also a bit of a romanticized take on it as well. But that's a small piece of a really huge issue with a lot of complexities. So I could go on about that clearly for a really long time. So I'll wrap up my answer to your question. But yeah, that's what my piece centered around. And it was really something that was, challenging to look at closely, because it is very difficult material, right? And it's complicated, and it's political, and it has undertones of church and state and all sorts of complicated pieces going on, but it's a very important story. And I think certainly it's something that when I talk to people about it outside of Ireland or outside of the UK, most people haven't really heard about it. So I would like to try and sort of increase the volume of that narrative a little bit.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's going to be like a second life for this project in the future.
Yeah, I am hoping. I'm particularly interested in looking at children that were, because my dissertation focused primarily on the women and their experience in the homes, and then paralleled that to the contemporary political movements that have been emerging, to sort of like speak for justice for these women and children. And now I'm sort of transitioning into more of a exploration on the children themselves, who are now, of course, adult people. Many of them living in American and English Irish diasporic spaces. So that's sort of where I'm focusing my research lately.
Fantastic. I mean, it just seems like such a rich and relevant bed of ideas that you're working on that seem to have a historical but contemporary connection, and I think that's sort of reflected in a lot of your other work. I had the pleasure of watching your one-woman show, as you know, By the Light of the Moon, and that was also very, very evocative and very, very gut-wrenching to watch at times. The whole idea of the woman in the victimhood, but also how she's dealing with where she is right now. And I feel that is in a lot of your work. I wanted to talk to you specifically about your confined movement project, and because that seems to sort of have a very interesting format. And if you could just give us a bit of background and your experience with that, because I know you've got some schools involved now as well with that project.
Yeah. So I think the big thing was I love big spaces. I love the possibility of blank canvases, right? Open dance studios. I love traveling. Mm-hmm. And I'd been in my little London flat for a long time, and I had tried to do some movement in my room and was like so stressed. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. Like I'm feeling this, I'm having this like really embodied experience of stress because I can't use my full kinesphere here. And there are these objects in my space. And it's really like, I was like, oh man, I have to really like look at that first of all, and like, take that in, and then also do something about it, right? And that's what prompted the ideas. I was like, okay, actually, these things aren't obstacles anymore. They're my friends. Like, how can I make them help me to create really interesting movement? So I was like getting back at my space a little bit initially, and then it evolved into this interesting thing. So that was the sort of beginning of it. And then you know, like I've said, I was like, well, how can I get other people involved in this? There's really no restriction. They just need to be stuck in their house like me, which is everyone. So that's great. And then I just reached out and garnered some interest. And then each day we had like a 2-week rehearsal period. And in the first week, each day was a specific workshop. So I just did some work creating workshops that I thought would generate interesting material. And then each day focused on a different way of generating that material. So one day was about using objects in your space as a partner and generating partnered movement with an object. And then another day was about mining your space for like angles and textures. And then, you know, so each day had a different focus, and then the dancers would work independently. And in the second week, we kind of pieced everything together. But what's interesting is that they each actually made their own film. So there are 6 full films that are just the dancers individually. And then there's the final film, which is everyone's footage, and that's what's been going around to festivals and stuff. But on our Vimeo, if anyone's interested in checking it out, you can also watch all the full videos from our individual dancers. And it's kind of a fun story, I think, to watch them all on their own, because they each very much have their own story, right? And then to watch the compilation, which then tells a very different story. I think. I mean, none of them are particularly narrative, right? It's not like beginning, middle, and end, here's the journey, right? But it's more about what everyone will take something a little bit different from it. But yeah, and everyone who worked on that project was just, I mean, I feel so grateful for all of them because they were so game. They had so many beautiful ideas. They took some really beautiful creative risks in their space. They were always being, oh, can I do this? Can I do that? Right? Some of them had never done dance for film before. So we had just a 1-hour workshop where I kind of explained to them the basic principles of that, how it worked, how to set it up at home. And then they just ran with it and created some really great stuff. So it was a wonderful team as well.
Yeah, it looked really amazing. I had to pop in on Vimeo and watched a couple. There was one with, I think Bertie was with, I didn't realize she had a pet bird. And it was, it was quite amazing to watch. Oh man. So I definitely recommend everyone to go on that and watch it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the beauty too of working in that way, right? Is that there's just no way that I could have anticipated exactly what would have come out of that. And at first, I mean, something about that I think is a little bit scary, right? Because as someone who's, I don't even really like the term directing in these kinds of projects. I kind of like view myself more as a curator. So as someone who's like curating this kind of work, obviously at the end of the day, the responsibility is on you about what your end product is going to be. So you have to be able to have some sense of what it's going to look like, but also if you're controlling it too much, then you're changing the nature of the project. So having that confidence, I think, in the team for work like this is key. And I obviously was very comfortable with the wonderful artists that I worked with. But yeah, you get wonderful things like birds that you never would have expected otherwise.
Dance partners. I love it. Now, that was really fantastic. So that's on the Indigo Arts Collective Vimeo. Is that how people can find it?
Yeah, it's linked on our website as well. And I think on our Instagram too. But yeah, our Vimeo page it's a font of virtual work at this point. So there are lots of fun things there to explore.
That's super fun. Yeah, I mean, I love that you know, that now there is this portfolio that people can go and sample this work and that you've built up really well. And the last one I wanted to mention was the doorway, the doorway dances, what do you call it? Yeah.
Doorstep dances, yeah.
Yeah, the doorstep dances, because that to me is just such an interesting take that you've sort of, it feels like it's come out of what you've explored last year, and then the idea of it to explore this, how do we deal with stepping, you know, out of one state into a new state represented by the year, and therefore the metaphor of the door. And I found myself very entranced watching them. There were some that really, you know, had such depth of, actually all of them had such depth of emotion and so much different variation in color. Because you think like, oh, there's a door, there's a person dancing in the doorway, and it's like, you know, it sounds so simple, but it's a real moment that I feel that everyone who has the opportunity to like probably work on the project. I'm sure that was extremely amazing. But also us as audiences to have a really sort of it feels because with dance is your main has been your entry. I guess would I say that your entry into the arts has been very much focused on dance, movement, musical theater, and then you're branching into all these other aspects of it. So that feels like the role of dance in that. But yeah, I'm waffling on now. Tell us more about that project.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. And I think I did, dance was very much my entry into performance, and is very much at the heart of what I love about performance work and what got me excited about it. And then in my professional life as a performer, I did mostly acting and musical theater, but it's something that I have a lot of love for. And I think particularly in my, like late teens, early 20s, dancers have this thing where you decide, or you come to understand whether that's something that you're actually going to be able to do or not, for a variety of reasons, but a lot of which have to do with how you're built and what you look like and what you're, you know what I mean? So there are all these complexities around that, that I think as a young person, you can get really hung up on. And certainly something that I spent a lot of time in my young performance life feeling all kinds of feels about. So to sort of make dance and make movement accessible for everyone, and to encourage everyone to access their own dancer, right? Even if there's somebody that maybe doesn't have a lot of technical training, is something that recently I've become really, really interested in, and sort of like taking that title back and, empowering people to use it to describe themselves, even if they're not all prima ballerinas, for example, right? So that's a piece of, I think, where my recent interest in this has really been coming from, just doing some like reflecting on that, now that I'm like leaving my 20s. But yeah, I think with that piece, I wanted something that was going to be kind of like a quick, like do it and done situation. So that was going to be low lift on the artists, or relatively low lift compared to some of the other projects that I've been doing. I wanted to tie it in with something, I tied it in with a fundraiser for an organization called Dancers Responding to AIDS, which is part of the Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS Association. It's a US-based organization that I worked with a lot as a kid. The company that I danced with growing up would do annual concerts and fundraisers and performances with them, and they just do really incredible work, and they've been doing some really great outreach initiatives for people affected by both COVID and HIV/AIDS in the performance community. So can't plug them enough. They're wonderful. Go look them up and give them your money if you have it, because they do incredible work. So I tied it in with that too, and I want it to be just something that was social media, low lift, quick fun, raising money for a good cause, but also that gave artists the opportunity for some useful catharsis, right? Because I was feeling those feelings at that time of like, oh, it's a new year. Everyone's like, ooh, 2020's over. But actually, not that much is different, or what is different, or we don't really know. And so embodying that, I think, is really interesting. And I will say, so I had the idea, and I pitched it to artists, and I started collecting material. And then as I was thinking about it, I was like, maybe I should do one too, just to sort of see what this feels like. And it was harder than it sounded. Like, even when I wrote out and when I asked them to do, I was like, that's a cool idea. That shouldn't be too tricky. That'll be interesting. I was like, ooh, there's really only so much you can do in a door. You really have to be thinking critically about how you're going to use the space and what you're trying to communicate. And I was glad that I did one in the end, because it gave me increased appreciation for the artists that participated. But yeah, that was a fun one. It was definitely something that yielded some really rich, beautiful work beyond sort of what I'd even expected.
Yeah, no, they were, from what I saw, I was, as I mentioned, I was quite entranced and amazed at what was done, but also the narrative and the ability for art to be, I think, very cathartic in that moment, isn't it? Sort of like you're accepting where you are, but also you're moving it through your body. Because I know a lot of artists have struggled this past year, and I certainly have had my moments where it's like I don't have my creative outlet that I've had before, or the people that I've had working with, so easily before. So I think this is a wonderful way that you've managed to connect people and explore based on you know being in a confined you know spaces and situations. So I think that's pretty amazing. I also you know want to put to anyone in the chat, if you guys have any questions for Shea, you know, whether you're watching this now or once we recorded it, you know, please send your questions over to us. And also you can contact Shea directly at Indigo Arts Collective on Instagram. She's also got her website, and you know, where else can we find you?
Yeah, I mean, Instagram is probably our biggest point of entry, I guess, that we're like kind of the most on top of. And our website is, I've recently updated it. It's pretty comprehensive. So if you did want to take a look through some of our past work, that's definitely the best place to go to access that. And also just more information about sort of like some of the theory behind it, some like more academic language around my methodology. Like if you're interested in sort of like my nerd side and want to learn a little bit more about that, that information is captured on the website as well. But yeah, and also too, just very happy to always chat or discuss workshop generation with people, or collaborate if you have an idea that you think is well suited to our ethos. I'm very happy to hear from folks.
Fantastic. And that's a perfect segue, because I know that you've got some upcoming projects as well that you're working on. Could you tell us about those? And also how people could apply?
Yes. So yeah, so I think, as some people might be discerning from sort of the through line of some of my past projects, the idea of women and also the way that women experience shame is something that's really interesting to me. So, right, whether that's through institutionalization, which is something I've spent a lot of time on, or whether that's ideas about identity and body and what you can do and what you can't do based on how you present physically, right, all that sort of stuff, I find really fascinating, because I think as a woman in a woman's body, that's something that relates to me personally, but also is something that's shared by like half of the population, right? So it's universal and it's also specific. And it's something that I feel we don't talk enough about, right? The power of shame is that we don't voice it. And the extent to which it's consistently used throughout history, right, as a tool to control people, all people, but I'm looking particularly at its use of control over women, is something that we all kind of know, right, to an extent, but like isn't directly voiced as often as I'd like to hear and see it be voiced. Because I think certainly growing up, attitudes around what it means to be in a woman's body sort of imply a sense of inherent guilt and shame just from day one. Right? So like, be careful what you're wearing. You don't want to attract negative attention. Cross your legs when you're sitting down, right? All of these things start coming in from such a young age. We're just born with this umbrella of shame over us for literally no other reason than just like how we were created. So I think that's really interesting. So when I was doing my dissertation, I did a lot of research on shame resilience theory, and sort of discussed in my work all of the reasons why the women in these particular institutions were not able to build any resilience to their shame, because the structure of those systems were designed so that they couldn't actually overcome that, right? Oftentimes they weren't allowed to use their own names. They couldn't talk to other women in the homes. Their families wouldn't take them back usually when they came out of these spaces. So it's, you know, it was an intentional tool. And then looking at how shame resilience theory can be applied to people experience shame in contemporary spaces to help them overcome that, you know, it was just such a shame that these women weren't offered those same opportunities. So I was like, okay, well, what if we apply shame resilience theory to performance work with contemporary women? And I opened the project up to anyone that identified as female. We have created a cast of all women, but we had opened it up to sort of anyone that identified in that way to join us, because it's more about the experience of living in that identity in whatever way you do, right? Less about the literal physical sex of someone. But yeah, so I opened this up and we got some overwhelmingly wonderful applicants from people. I asked them in their application to just send me a quick video explaining why the project was interesting to them. And even just the variety of responses to that was so illuminating, right? There's just so many different levels in which people connect and understand shame. So we actually have just concluded casting for that project. And I have a team of 7 incredible artists who I've started rolling out on our Instagram. And I'm just going to keep introducing one a day until we've introduced them all. And we start rehearsals on Monday. But that project will work sort of similar to Choreography Confined in that we have a week of workshops to generate material. And then once I see what we've generated, then I'll decide how I'm going to curate that together in our second week of time together. But that's the idea. It's really just speaking truth to shame and like putting it away as a result of that. So taking ownership over whatever it is. And, you know, I've said to the artists as well, that can be something very personal or it can be something general and indirect. And, you know, it's just about whatever that means to them. And I think my expectation is that some people might even surprise themselves in the journey and things might come out that we didn't expect. And I think that's going to be really exciting and interesting to look at too.
Oh my gosh, so excited. Yeah, so we're going to see the fruits of that labor in, I guess, about a month's time-ish, kind of. So we'll be able to, everybody follow Shea at Indigo Arts Collective, and we'll be able to see how that project progresses.
And I will say, this is something we haven't like put out there yet, but Car Crash Productions exclusive. I'll plug perhaps our next project on the pipeline. So if anyone's listening, you can start getting the gears turning about this. We're going to start gathering information and artist interest on like a longer scale, larger project coming up that I'm tentatively calling right now the Forgotten Gallery. And it's going to be a collaboration of photographers, writers, and voice artists, or anyone who has any of those talents in their wheelhouse. If you're all 3, great. If you're 2 of the 3, great. Any combination of that. But in the next week or so, we're going to put out our initial call for photographs. And what we're looking to do is create a gallery of forgotten objects. And then we're going to have our writing team, whoever those talents are, create monologues from those objects' perspectives. And then they're going to be voiced by voice talent. And then the hope, this is something we're looking to get funding for, is that this will exist in a physical gallery space once we can occupy physical spaces together again. And then each photograph will have a QR code that audiences can scan and then hear that object's story. So if anyone's already like, ooh, I have ideas, you can reach out to us and send us a message. We're looking specifically for photographs of things that have not been able to fill their purpose in the last year. So whether that's like your favorite pair of stilettos or your backpack to go to school or any object that has just been being neglected, sitting around with a story to tell, that's what we're looking for. So that's our next project on the pipeline. We're going to begin developing material for that as we're wrapping up the Shame project. And then hopefully that's something we'll put into physical spaces in the fall. So
fantastic. Well, it sounds like you've got an unstoppable rocket ship that you're flying on, and I just love what you're doing, Shea. And I know a lot of people watching this are going to be excited to, you know, follow you, but also potentially work with you. And I know you also give, you're also a coach. You're also a creative coach, and that's really exciting. I think, like, you know, I mean, I personally haven't, you know, also had taken classes, you know, like a lot of us, like, we're doing online classes and stuff. But, you know, I think a lot of artists out there, if they are feeling like they need that creative boost, you know, I mean, could you tell us very briefly about what that coaching is and how people can get on it if they'd like to explore?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my last master's, I got really into, like, you know, defining my methodology, right? And figuring out what that was and the way that I worked. And not to say that that's one box, right? I have a lot of like, if this, then maybe this, or this, right? So I work in lots of different ways, but getting a really clear grasp on what that was, and like capturing it, for me, it'll be either in a document or right in a tool system that works for me, was really empowering, because it took out some of the mystery of like, I have this idea, but how do I create it, right? And it just gives me more agency as an art maker, because I have a really clear idea of what my systems are. So my goal with coaching, I did a life coaching certification course as sort of a foundation, and then a short course in behavioral psychology. And then of course I have my own experience and training in the arts. So I'm trying to bring all those three things together to coach artists specifically in like getting control of their methodology. But also like working through stumbling blocks, ideating. So like if you have a project, how do you create an outline for yourself into something that can actually happen? And then, you know, bigger picture things too, like overcoming imposter syndrome, I feel like is a really big thing for artists, right? Like, who am I to create this piece of work, or who am I to market my own material, right? So figuring out ways to get more comfortable with those sorts of things. And also workshop generation too, if people are interested in adapting their methodologies into teaching tools. That's something that I work with as well.
Cool beans. I think that's wonderful, and people obviously can get in contact with you on all your socials and the website and stuff if they want to find out more, or just have a chat with you about it. I think this is extremely awesome time with you today, Shea. I just want to tell everyone, you know, like, please, you know, follow her, like her. Are you on Twitter as well? I'm sure you're on Twitter. But
I am. I'm not great at Twitter, but we're on there at Indigo Arts Collective. Find us, tweet us, maybe I'll get better at it.
Cool. Well, it's been awesome having you here today, Shea. And we're really looking forward to seeing what carries on in the Indigo Arts sphere. And yeah, and we'll also be looking out for that information about how we can collaborate on the Forgotten Objects project and everything. And yeah, so it's been wonderful having you today.
Awesome. Thanks, Steph. Really good to see you, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on, and thank you everybody for watching. We'll be having more of these car shares every Wednesday, and also on Fridays we've got some amazing graduates performing their work. So stay tuned, everyone, and bye for now. Thank you, Shea. Bye.
Bye.